cost of living crisis that we're in right now, it's more important than ever to be super careful with the way you spend your money so you don't end up frittering it all away on things that maybe in a month, 2 months, maybe a year, you look back and think, why did I even buy that? I can't even remember why I wanted it. So here's 5 tips for you to be able to avoid those unnecessary purchases that can keep you poor. So the first thing is to implement a waiting period. This is something that I've personally found really helpful. So what I do is I will just think about buying something, and rather than just click the buy button and click purchase or whatever, if it's something that I'm shopping for online, I'll just put it in my save for later cart. Basically, every single online shopping platform has this now where you can just save it for later. And then I just save it for later. And then that way I can kind of think about it and give it a few days, a week, maybe even a month to be able to think over if I really want it or really need it. Because half the time I'll come back in a few days and be like, I don't even remember why I wanted that, but you kind of get out of the immediacy and the urgency of wanting that item and get the chance to sleep on it, think it over. I would say especially the larger the purchase gets, the longer you want that waiting period to be to really think about it, weigh the pros and cons, do your research. And then if you're looking at financing that item with debt, for example, take out a loan to finance a home renovation, finance a new car, something like this, you definitely want to have all your homework done before you go ahead and agree to sign on the dotted line for your loans. So that's just really helpful, is to implement a waiting period, because you're much less likely to make some kind of impulsive purchase and then wake up the next morning with that pit in your stomach, just that feeling of like, oh my goodness, like it's that gut feeling, that we all get if we've made a bad decision, and be like, oh, whoops, now that I've had a chance to really think it over, that wasn't the best idea ever. So that's the first thing, implement that waiting period. You pick how long you want it to be, whatever works for you. The second thing is to not buy into the FOMO, so the fear of missing out. It's really important when you are shopping to remember that the entire sales and marketing industry is geared towards getting you to do one thing and one thing only, and that is to say yes as much as possible to whatever it is that they're selling. So it's hard in the face of decades of market research and all of the very well-trained salespeople. It can be really, really challenging to hold your ground and say no politely and firmly. And, if it's a really high pressure sales situation, feel free to walk out of the store, hang up the phone, whatever you need to do. Just don't hand your credit card information over. So just remember that a lot of times the whole system is geared towards saying, this sale only goes for another day, or it's 20% off today only, a lot of these kind of things that give you this sense of like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have such bad FOMO if I don't buy this right now. I'm going to miss this sale. And so anyway, absolutely just watch out for that as much as possible. The third thing that you can do to avoid unnecessary purchases is to check the returns policy first. So let's say that you didn't implement a waiting period and you got sucked in with FOMO, and now you came home with something that you wake up the next morning and decide you don't want and shouldn't have bought and can't afford, frankly. And so the thing that you don't want to have happen at this point is to have purchased this item, say from a boutique, with a very prohibitive, difficult returns policy. Some stores literally will only have like a couple of days of returns policy. Some stores, depending on which items you've purchased, won't let you return it at all. And maybe you're stuck with exchanging, but you're never going to get your money back from that company. So personally, I preferentially shop at stores that have very generous returns policies, because even I sometimes fall into the trap of some well-meaning salesperson, and they will be doing their job very well, right? Because they get me to say yes. And I used to work retail, so I've definitely been trained in this whole industry myself. And so they're just doing their job to get you to say yes. But sometimes it happens to me where I'll get home from a day out of shopping and have come home with some things that weren't on my list and I didn't have a chance to really research and look into. So at that point, if you have shopped at a store that's got a generous returns policy, you can always take things back. Remember too, you don't need to go into a long-winded explanation of why you're returning something, particularly if it was something that wasn't in your budget and you need to bring it back over a financial matter. You don't need to explain that. that to the store manager. All you need to do is say, it didn't work out for me, and just leave it at that. Something very vague in general. So I'd really encourage you to not feel one bit bad about returning things as long as they're in their original packaging and in good shape. Don't obviously, use stuff and then take it back. But if it's something like that where you've accidentally fallen into that sales trap and the FOMO, then feel free to take things back and check that return policy first. The fourth thing to do to avoid unnecessary expenses that keep you poor is to make a list. So I mentioned this a minute ago. This is something that I've started doing in the past couple of years in particular as we've entered this cost of living crisis. We've had all this high inflation that we're dealing with, high interest rates on everything, high cost of food and all of this. And so it's just been something where, especially at the grocery store, I've just started to make a really strict list for myself because the grocery store is kind of my weak spot. I love to cook. I love food. And so I will often come home with like all kinds of new stuff that I wanted to try. And it wasn't on my list and it's not really in my grocery budget. But you know how the grocery stores, there's all these yummy little things to try. And of course, then they'll have like all the beautiful displays of other things, non-grocery items at the ends of the aisles to tempt you. So it's really important to make your list and just really stick to it and just give yourself, if you see something beautiful that you like at the store while you're out shopping, just take a picture of it and put it in a little file to save for later to think about maybe picking it up another time. Because pretty much you can always find, if it sells out, that item sells out at that store, unless it's something really, really unique, you can usually find it again later somewhere else. So very often you'll be able to purchase that thing down the line if you really want to. And then the fifth thing to do is to reward yourself wisely. So in our Western culture, there's such a kind of retail therapy culture that we live in, where the sort of going thing is if you've had a bad day or you had a breakup or, got out on the wrong side of bed, just go for a little shopping spree, have some retail therapy, and everything's going to be fine. Well, we all know how this ends because you were already having a bad day. You go shopping in a bad mood, your defenses are down. The salespeople are there doing their job probably very well. And, and then you end up saying yes to a whole bunch of stuff that wasn't in your budget. You come home with all these bags of things and then you're like, oh my goodness, the next morning you're like, wow, I just made my bad day or my bad week that much worse. And I think shopping in and of itself, I love to shop, don't get me wrong. So shopping's really fun. It can be a fun social, thing to be able to interact with other people. And the stores are always beautifully laid out and there's fun music going on. And it's very fun and very social, but it's very easy, especially if you're having a bad day, to fall into that trap of just coming home with way more stuff than you really have any business buying. So if you are going to get some retail therapy in, try to make a list and make sure that give yourself a budget for your shopping spree. That's what I'm trying to say. Make sure you have a budget for your shopping spree if you're going out or if you're doing some online shopping after a bad day at work. Give yourself a budget, say $50 or $100 or whatever it is to spend on something that will hopefully cheer you up a little bit, because sometimes we just have those days where we do need to cheer ourselves up. And remember too, shopping and buying yourself something isn't the only way to practice self-care, and it's not even necessarily the most effective way to practice self-care. So think about other things that would also help you feel better, such as maybe time in nature. You might want to pick up a good book or watch a fun movie that you love, spend time with your friends and loved ones and family, take your dog for a walk, go out and do some gardening if you're into gardening. If you've got a hobby, maybe pick that up for a little bit and do that. Start a new hobby. Go take a nap. I mean, sometimes it can be just a real luxury these days with how sleep deprived most people are right now in the US. I was just seeing an interesting statistic. The average American only gets 6 hours and 35 minutes of sleep a night, which I would just be a zombie if I tried to operate on that. I have to get a lot more than that. But it's really nice to be able to sometimes be able to put your feet up and chill out for a while. So really think that through too, of are there other ways other than retail therapy that you can use to practice self-care to kind of cheer yourself up or reward yourself for having reached a big milestone rather than going out and buying yourself some stuff to celebrate. Think about other ways that you could be able to celebrate that as well, maybe with an experience, for example. So those are my 5 tips for how to avoid unnecessary expenses and unnecessary purchases. Let me know in the comments what else you would recommend or other tips and tricks that work for you on that front. Thank you again so much for your comments, and I will see you again soon in my next video.